Now we're going to talk about money. I'm in Miller chapter 15. I think this actually could merit two chapters, but Miller compresses it into one. I'm going to be pretty long on the subject of money because it's an important part of economics in our economy, and it's also actually more interesting than you might have ever thought. So I'm going to start in what I think should be a fairly appropriate place, and that is really thinking about what is money. You know, we know what a dollar is, or a 10 or a 20 or whatever currency. We know that, but we also know that we can buy things using electronic transactions, and we know about the existence of things like Bitcoin. We also know of the value of gold. Everyone's familiar with that. I think. We also know, that, of course, that there are other currencies, and we probably are all familiar with the fact that in history and in different times and places, other things beyond currencies or any of the things I've just mentioned have also served as money. So let's really think about the common characteristics of anything that has served as money. What is going on there? What makes something money? And I look at it as money being anything that is regularly used in exchange. Regularly used in exchange is a way to define money, a simple way. It's something we can use to buy goods and services from other people regularly. Because sometimes we can make a trade. Does that mean that the thing that I might trade is money? No, that's just a trade. So there's a little difference there. We'll go ahead and explore this just a little bit deeper. To be money, the thing that we're talking about that we're calling money, it generally has three functions or kind of characteristics about it that make it so, other than what I simply have said so far, that it's regularly used in exchange. The first of these, and these have specific names, the first of these is a store of value. That means, by store of value, a fancy definition, and then I'll water that down. It means that purchasing power can be transferred from the present into the future. Purchasing power can be transferred from the present into the future. Purchasing power. So, comparing our currency to something that we might use perhaps regularly in trade, let's say bananas, our currency has a much stronger store of value than bananas. Actually, as it is, my wife made banana bread this morning, and of course, for that, you use overripe or really rotten bananas to bake banana bread, which I love. And so I just saw some really rotten bananas just this morning. The thing with bananas is they rot pretty easily. They don't last long, and I bet most everyone watching this has at some point or other done as I have, where you thought, I'm just going to save this banana for later, and I put it in my backpack or in even a coat pocket, intending to eat a banana later. And I think we all know, if we've done that very many times, they get smashed, and we have a very messy backpack. I've been there several times because I don't learn my lesson that quickly, I guess. What's that mean about its ability to be used? If I accepted that in trade as money, what does that mean about its ability to be used in the future, its purchasing power? It's really weak because it decays and it breaks or smashes, however you want to describe it, very easily. Our currency is much more durable than that. Our currency can even withstand the wash, as we've all probably done as well. So it has a much better store of value. So that's one characteristic that tends to be, or is a function of money, something that it does for us, maintains that store of value. And this next one, make sure you understand this, because this is kind of what's, in my mind, monetary policy, and much of our, many of the balances that we walk as an economy are dependent on this function of money. It's called the medium of exchange. The medium of exchange function of money is this behavior where people will actually accept it. Like I could say, this ruler is really valuable and try to convince you to sell me something for this ruler. But it would take that real convincing, because this is not something that people are willing to accept as money. The US dollar, 10, 5, 20, whichever denomination you choose to think about, you can reliably count on people accepting that as money. That is the medium of exchange function of the US dollar. If you drop a $10 bill on the ground and walk away, it's a pretty safe bet it will be gone pretty promptly. If I drop this on the ground, it might be picked up. It might not, for who knows how long, in a crowded place. And that's because it's something that is not, it doesn't have that medium of exchange, the people's willingness to accept it. And that's very important for our money, and I'm going to get back to that in just a few minutes here. The third function of money is something that we probably have never thought about before, but it's there, and it is a little interesting if you give it some thought. That's called the unit of account. The unit of account. So when I go into a convenience store and I look at the soda coolers, I can look at a pint of milk for $1, or I could look at some energy drink for $2. And that tells me, because of those price tags that are on there, that this thing is going to cost me twice what this thing is going to cost me as a consumer. And that measurement, that's the unit of account. Compare our system to a system of barter, where a hypothetical system of barter, where you might go into a store and have to trade something each time you get something. Well, if you're going in and you're saying, I have a lot of bananas today, how many bananas would you accept for that pint of milk? You would have to then get an answer to that. And then you'd say, well, how many bananas would you accept for this energy drink? And if the shopkeeper could be consistent, it would be twice as many bananas that they would accept for that. But what about when the next customer walks in with coconuts? Then that has to be done all over again with coconuts. And what if in the parking lot we strike up a conversation of how many bananas we might trade for those coconuts? We have to do that. And theoretically, hopefully, that would be consistent so that these things would all cost the same amount across the soda, the energy drink, the milk, the bananas, and the coconut. But you can see how challenging that would be. Whereas when we have the US dollar, this says 1, this says 2. I know what that is. If I want to trade somebody in the parking lot a $5 bill for 5 ones, we know it's 5 ones to one $5 bill, unlike the coconuts to bananas. So that is a neat thing about money that it does for us that we might take for granted. Now, I said I would circle back to the medium of exchange. Here I go. There are 2 types of money that we can classify money into. One is largely theoretical, but it helps us to get a feel for what money really is. So let's do it anyway. What I'm referring to is called commodity money. Commodity money, it's some kind of a commodity that serves some other purpose. A 10-cent term is that it has intrinsic value. It can do something else other than these 3 functions we've described here. And of course, a go-to example is gold. Gold can be used for different kinds of metal applications. It can be used, this is an interesting thing I learned at the Smithsonian. Space helmets, those masks, the windshield on space helmets, actual space helmets, not in sci-fi, but the real thing. Those are actually lined with fine particles of gold because there's no UV protection in space from the sun, and astronauts would get burned very badly by direct sun rays. So they actually line those with gold as a protectant from the sun. Just a fun fact, if you win on Cash Cab with that fact, remember me and I want my share. So that's one application for gold other than just its value in terms of financial investment, right? Treating it like money for the time being. It can also be used, of course, in teeth. We've probably all seen that. It can be used in other electrical applications, as I understand it. I don't understand it very well, but I think it can. And I think the reason that we know of gold as being something of value goes back, way back, to pre-Iron Age when, and I might be wrong about this, but I think I am right, when the number of metals that human beings could work with and make metal things from was much smaller than it is today because they couldn't get furnaces as hot to make things out of metal. So you needed softer metals to make things. Gold is a soft metal. You know what else gold is true about gold? It doesn't tarnish or rust. So it holds it's something you can make into a shape. It holds its shape well, and it holds its finish well. You know, it remains as it was. Silver, I believe, is harder than gold. Quite sure of it. So a little harder to work with, but it also carries those other characteristics. Bronze or the alloy of brass, and these things, they tarnish. Other metals have a tendency to tarnish or rust, or iron ore is very, very hard to work with. So of the early metals that were available to early people, gold was highly desirable. And I think that is why it still has its value today. But its usefulness to us today isn't like it was to our ancestors a couple thousand years ago, because we have many substitutes for gold now. And what I'm getting at is that sometimes things that serve as money or can serve as money really don't have intrinsic or commodity value. I think gold used to have more commodity value than it does today. Yet everybody knows that gold is valuable. In fact, it's about $1,800 and change per ounce right now. Money that has no intrinsic value has a different name than commodity money. Its name is fiat money. And I'm suggesting that gold largely has fiat value when it used to have commodity value. That's what I'm suggesting. That's just me. But what isn't just me, what is often suggested, or used as an example, and I'm sure in your textbook as well, of fiat money is the US dollar. What good is the US dollar? What's it good for? I know you want them. I want them too. Everybody wants them. Why? What can it do? It can't keep you from getting sunburned in space. Not even. Not even. You can't make dishes from it as they did 2,000 years ago with gold. No. I mean, I suppose you could glue it together or something if you want to really split hairs, but no. It's not even good to write on, to like take notes. Ink doesn't stick to our currency terribly well, yet everybody wants it. Is it backed by gold or some other valuable thing? It is not. The thing that gives the US dollar its value, first and foremost, is the medium of exchange. It's valuable precisely because people believe it's valuable and they're willing to accept it. Precisely because you want it and I want it, it has value. It's backed only, it's a fiat currency, it's not a commodity currency, it has no purpose other than to serve as a currency, and it's backed only by our belief in the United States government, who is the issuing body of that currency. But it has no gold, there is no gold standard anymore. It has nothing backing it other than the fact that people are willing to accept it reliably. That's why the medium of exchange, I think, is such an interesting function of money, because that's what fiat currency, like our dollar, is really, its value is really based in that. And I think that's a really interesting thing to wrap our heads around. This thing that we all value has no value aside from our shared value of it. I know that blows your mind. I know it does. You hadn't thought about that till today. But there it is. Now, what if one day that changes? What if something happens and people stop valuing this? A critical mass of people around the world stop valuing the US dollar. Is that illegal? Will the sky fall? Is there some floor under it that will necessarily keep that from happening and it can't happen? Well, it can happen. And it has happened to currencies. So in my notes, I have a photograph I found somewhere of a Zwanzig Millarden mark. Uh, Millarden in German, I believe, it actually means million billion. If I got all this correct from my research on the web. And the reason that there was a 20 million billion mark note in 1923 was because after the First World War, there was the Treaty of Versailles, and the Treaty of Versailles required Germany, the Axis powers, to pay war reparations to the Allies, those who won the war, the countries that won the war, for the damages done. I mean, you blow a lot of stuff up, you kill a lot of people, and that's what happens in war. There's a lot of economic costs there and human costs that can be translated into dollars in terms of building somebody. So they basically build the Axis from World War One at the end of the war with the Treaty of Versailles. Well, after a couple of years, the Germans, trying to pay that war debt, decided, well, you want 100 million marks? We'll get you 100 million marks. We'll have it for you tomorrow. There are ways. So they went over to their printing press, and they just cranked up the dial. Just print them out. Here you go, England. There's your 100 million marks. Well, that has implications. If you hear of that happening and you have marks in your pocket, how do you feel about holding on to that money in your pocket? You want to get rid of it because you know what's coming next is that it's going to lose its value. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because as you know it, I know it. So does everybody. So everybody who has that in our pockets or in our accounts, we want to dump that as quickly as possible to get something that has its value, that has a stored value, that isn't going to plummet in value or buying power the way a printed currency like that is going to. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's how you can go from inflation to hyperinflation, which is just double-digit inflation, is a fear of holding on to a currency because of the future loss of value of that currency. It becomes self-fulfilling or a downward spiral or a snowballing effect. And so the store of value of a currency can evaporate when it's a fiat currency very quickly. And there's nothing that protects any currency in the world from that, really, beyond people's willingness to accept it. And then there are things that policymakers can do that affect that, but that is a matter of a critical mass of human psychology, not of the value of what that currency itself can do, like a metal or something that has commodity value. That's just the nature of fiat currencies. So I think with that described, the meaning of money, I think I can stop recording this little introduction, and I'll move on now to some other more nuts and bolts around money.